don't ever do that again. How many times do we have to go through this? Never again.
She was throwing her food all over the floor, and I lost it. I grabbed her out of the high chair, and I started shaking her. There was no other way to get her to stop crying.
I couldn't stop him. He whipped them and whipped them with that belt. It was the worst moment of my life. That was our first trip to the emergency room.
These are the stories of child physical abuse. Stories unfolding every day in every town across the country. Stories that in most cases never get told. Stories that in many cases end in tragedy. Each story is unique, but they all have one thing in common. A parent or adult caregiver who inflicts physical harm upon a child. A parent who loses their temper. A trusted adult who loses their focus. We are going to tell just one of these stories, a true story told through the real experiences of a family in trouble. A family that was able to recover from the emotional and physical effects of child physical abuse. We are going to bring the issue of child abuse into focus. Most importantly, we will provide an overview of some new and promising treatment options that are effectively reducing adverse behavior. These options involve teaching a variety of skills to parents and children. These evidence-based treatments are intended for use with all forms of child physical abuse, from mild to severe. They are called family focus interventions, and they are having a positive impact on providing hope to children and families wherever they are practiced. In the United States, our federal and state governments have spent several $billions every year to care for abused children. While much has been accomplished, much remains to be done. There are simply too many children suffering from physical abuse who do not have access to quality, evidence-based services.
It's usually the consequence that defines something as child physical abuse, but in some cases it could be the act itself, especially if that act could have produced some type of serious physical injury.
There's actually a lot of discussion of how to define what exactly is physical abuse. Most people would agree that when a child is hit with a hand, with an object, and it leaves some injury, maybe a bruise, sometimes a broken bone, sometimes worse, that is considered physical abuse.
The professional organization that I work with, the American Academy of Pediatrics, defines it as injury to a child's body which leaves red marks beyond a temporary time period. Every year, the child protection system gets about 3 million calls on about 2 million children, and they interview and evaluate this situation. And so every year, the system decides that we have about 900,000 children in our country who are abused or neglected. That's 1.2% of all children.
If the child, in fact, is injured, if their child experiences pain and it limits their functioning, or if the child experiences, as a result, significant side effects, significant behaviors that interfere with the child's ability to develop, then I would call it child abuse.
Well, when you think about parents who spank their children as a form of discipline and do that on a fairly regular basis, if not every day, several days a week, and before you know it, perhaps the parent has crossed the line, not necessarily intentionally, but they've crossed the line just because they are losing some control in regard to how they're disciplining their child.
Although the definition varies by state, physical abuse is not limited to a single behavior or consequence. Instead, it involves the use of physical force that causes injury or pain to a child.
I did recently have a case of a 10-year-old little boy. There was a domestic violence call to the home, and the police found this mother totally out of control. She had been beating her son, and he was just covered with bruises and lacerations from the belt beating. So he's brought to the hospital, and I'm doing my thing. I'm sort of counting the bruises, I'm sort of taking pictures, and I suddenly realized that there are tears coming down his face. And I stopped and I looked at him and I said, "Can you tell me what's going on? Why are you crying?" And he said to me, "If I hadn't been bad, she wouldn't have hit me and she wouldn't be in trouble now."
I'm a single mom. I've been taking care of my children pretty much by myself since they were born. I was married, I got divorced, and I moved out here. In the past few years, I've been getting less and less cooperation from my children. The communication was just, there was none. Me just yelling at them just ignoring me.
Miss Branch came into the system because of her neglect issues with her son. She is a single parent. She's raising 2 children on her own without a lot of support. It's work and children. So that has been her focus pretty much for probably quite a while.
More often than not, abuse is only part of the story. Poverty, substance abuse, mental health problems, domestic violence, and challenges to meeting children's basic needs for housing, food, and clothing are just a few of the issues families may struggle with, in addition to abuse.
There are a number of risk factors one has to consider for parents. Are they depressed? Are they using or abusing alcohol? Has a parent begun to blame the child for the parent's own discomfort, issues, problems, concerns?
Some of the more impressive background characteristics relate to the history of the parent and the way the parent interacts with the child. So in terms of the history, some parents, not all, have had their own history of child physical abuse, and of course that may increase the likelihood that they do the same kind of thing to others.
She had high expectations for her children, such as the children had to have the house clean, the children had to have meals cooked, and it all stemmed from, "I work, you need to do your chores as well." And a lot of the abuse would come about because the children had not done the things that she had left for them to do.
I had discipline issues with my children. I would tend to hit them, yell at them. I did a lot of things I'm not very proud of.
She grew up in violence. Miss Branch grew up in a home where her mother had been sick for many years, and her mother used physical force to kind of contain 6 children.
Just as there are different reasons for why a parent might abuse a child, there are several types of consequences that the children who are abused may experience. Probably the most common in child physical abuse is physical aggression, some type of intimidation or use of force or coercion against other children.
A second impact is a sense that the family is not safe for the child. The child can live in that family with a sense that it's going to happen again and live with a lot of anticipation of future events occurring.
I do believe that we sometimes forget that the child, once their body is healed, continues to need help and support and professional care to help them to continue to recover from the emotional and mental health damage that's been done to their bodies and to their souls.
Children who have experienced physical abuse and parents who have used physical abuse have certain characteristics. Some of those characteristics for children include the experience of emotional distress, such as sadness, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, having upsetting thoughts about what happened to them, and having trouble learning or focusing in school. Some of the characteristics of parents or caregivers may include the routine use of physical punishment or discipline, difficulties managing their emotions, and having unrealistic expectations of their children.
Child health services throughout the country spend a significant part of their resources identifying abuse cases, evaluating the children, and then referencing them to services that can help. They're aided in this effort by teachers, guidance counselors, nurses, physicians, lawyers, judges, police officers, and many others. It is now clear that a more consistent and efficient system of referrals and treatments is needed. a system based on what we're calling family-focused interventions.
Family-focused interventions involve 4 different characteristics. One is that there's a focus on stopping the abuse, changing the way in which the parent interacts with the child so the child is less likely to be hurt or in some way mistreated. A second characteristic is that there is a focus on teaching parents and children skills. A third characteristic is that there's a focus on working with the parents and the children together to improve their interactions. And the last characteristic is that there's actually an evidence base to support the intervention. That is, that there's information that shows that the intervention is feasible and effective.
And it's especially important because we have approaches that have been carefully developed, evaluated, and shown to be helpful.
One of the first things a practitioner may do is to acknowledge the abuse and develop methods to prevent it from happening again.
And it's very helpful when in therapy that I ask the parents to say to the children, this is what I did to you, because then it gives the children permission to talk about what really did happen.
I did some terrible things to my children. It was something we always kept closed behind doors. Now I'm being upfront about it, saying it right in front of people. Not to say I was proud of it, but that I was admitting to it and that I was sorry for it and that I wanted things to be better.
The next step in working with the family may involve teaching skills to children, such as how to cope effectively with social challenges or emotional distress, and teaching skills to parents or caregivers, such as how to replace the use of physical force with effective discipline practices, and to better manage their response to stressful situations.
Parenting skills are very important. And some of those skills are just basics. They're just being present with your child, being interested in what your child is doing, and doing some very active listening.
Naomi helped me work on my parenting skills because I was disciplining them for everything. Going from using physical to a lot of grounding. And I was like, well, that's not necessary. We need more natural consequences for them to think on their own. This was a much better approach. I like this much better.
The third step in working with the family may involve teaching skills to encourage positive family interactions, such as how to effectively communicate and solve problems together.
They learned how to compromise, and most important, I think they learned how to communicate.
At some point, my children realized that this was something that could actually work and that life was becoming better.
So, family-focused interventions can contribute enormously to trying to address this problem.
There's been both a demand from clinicians, but there's also been a demand from the child welfare system, where many of these kids may wind up.
There are many possible individuals who could refer a family for services. Could be a teacher, could be a social worker, could be someone in a hospital or a medical person. It also usually is caseworkers. All of those individuals would need to know about family-focused interventions.
Other families, it's clear they have a lot more shame and a lot more guilt and remorse about what has occurred. And they may, in fact, not so openly talk about it with some sense that they'll be judged. They may be wary of professionals because professionals have come into their lives and have taken some control. In those instances, the staff really make a really great effort at trying to differentiate our role from the role of child welfare workers and other court officials. And oftentimes, once that happens, families can be more trusting, more open, and more engaged.
Both children showed signs of withdrawal. They presented scared. They lacked communication. It was almost as though they needed her to give them permission to speak. On the night that her son disappeared, she had almost put up this wall as to where she said, "I don't really care. He's causing me too many problems." And as we were out looking for her son that night, she turned to me in the middle of the street and she asked me, "How do I know that I even love my son?" Well, my response to her was, "What you're doing right now."
He ended up going to the hospital that was down the street, which I was so glad that he went there. I remember calling Naomi and I said, "What do I say to him? I don't know what to say. I mean, I know what I want, how I felt, but I didn't know how to say it." And she just said, "Tell him I'm glad that you're home and that you're safe." He just opened up. He's like, "I'm sorry I did that, Mom. I was just upset." It was a whole different reaction. I was stunned. That's when I saw this can work.
As therapy progressed, I used that as a theme for her to help her to gauge how much she cared about her kids.
In general, we think of success as when you can resolve the types of problems the family came to you with. But we also define success in terms of whether or not the family can kind of move on. That is, they can end their involvement in services, they can end their involvement in the system and kind of move forward on their own.
But what we want for children is for them to be able to really heal from the experience of being traumatized. And that healing means that they are able to appropriately talk about what has happened. They're able to express the kinds of emotions and experiences we would anticipate they would have given the incident of abuse.
Our work with family-focused interventions has produced, I think, a number of benefits to families. One is that sometimes parents begin to use more positive discipline practices. A second benefit has been to the children themselves. Many of them show improvements in their sociability, in their work at school, in their relationships with friends, and even with their parents, for example. And then finally, we've seen improvements in terms of the ways the families interact. They're much more friendly, they're much more cohesive, and we don't see the conflict and the tension that they presented with.
The therapy helped a lot with my son. He wants to be home. Even when we have difference of opinions, he's open to discuss it instead of shutting down. I'm open to talk with him too, vice versa. A lot more respect between the two of us.
The approaches used in family-focused interventions have a track record of being highly effective. They are a new and powerful tool to battle against child physical abuse. Family-focused interventions all have something in common. They can create more positive and lasting outcomes for children and families everywhere.
I do feel that I've gotten much closer to my children due to this experience. Our conversations are much more loving towards each other. They're more real. My kids are more open to tell me what they think. I just want to tell my kids I love them. Not many people get this many chances and then get to go through a program like this. Thank you.
Children can recover from the effects of abuse, and adults can learn to focus on becoming better parents, one family at a time, one story at a time.